Go ahead.
Good afternoon, good evening, maybe even good morning to some of you. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of Omega Wealth Management's series talking about navigating and processing the COVID-19 experience. I'm Lisa Kirschenbauer, and I'm here to just share some thoughts and ideas. And actually, we're going to have a couple of polls today. We are recording this, and we welcome you to chime in with any comments or questions. You can use the Q&A little box at the bottom or the chat, whichever. I've got my associate Davis Gardner joining us as well to help with answering or sharing any of the questions during the recording. So we'd like to go ahead and get started with the program and talk a little bit about processing and navigating the COVID-19 experience. In our first session, I talked a little bit about perhaps some of the stages of grief that people might be feeling, also from the Financial Transitionist Institute, which Kathy and Jared and I are all part of, the 4 stages of a pandemic, and how we're really just making our way through that right now. I want to actually review that before we start to talk about today's topic, which is the impact of money stress on relationships. So I want to just review the 4 stages of a pandemic transition. Now, for many of us, there was a little bit of anticipation before that lockdown happened. And now really where we are is in that ending piece. We've had the lockdown. Most of us are coming out of it, are in some phase of the recovery, the heading towards, as it says, the new normal. But we're still waiting for testing, at least antibodies. We're still waiting for a reliable treatment and certainly for a vaccine. And it's coming. It's hard to know when that's going to be, though. So we think that this stage may take up to a year. Maybe it'll be shorter depending on how quickly we get a vaccine, but it's going to take a little bit of time. And the next stage is passage. So really it starts to feel like things are over. We're moving forward. There's some new routines. It feels a bit like normal, but it's not quite like it used to be. It really is the beginning of thinking about how we might do things differently, and we'll be talking about that more in our next session, and really maybe the next chapter of life or work for you, and finally that new normal. And we do say new normal, not getting back to normal. So the importance of reiterating these stages today is to give you a sense of thinking about where you might be, and we'll talk a little bit about the grief as well, and where some of your most important loved ones may be as well. We also talked a little bit about the 6 stages of grief, and this is especially important as we start to talk about money stress and the stress of this whole COVID-19 experience on yourself and on those you care about. The first stage being denial, really the sense that, well, this isn't for real, this isn't going to last, we're going to get over it soon. Moving to anger, and some of us definitely were frustrated for a while of being locked down, cooped up in our homes. And then moving to bargaining, that place where we're sort of making it work, we're trying to hang in there just a little bit longer. And for some of us, there was this piece of sadness, and there may even still be some sadness. Perhaps, as we like to talk about the anticipatory grief, thinking ahead to the fall, the things that are getting canceled, maybe a summer vacation that's not happening. And so I want to just encourage you to revisit where you might be, whether it's sadness or the next stage, acceptance. So just coming to grips with, this is where we are, this is how it's going to be, or maybe even meaning. What have I learned from this? What might I change? How are things going to be different on the other side of this? So you might be in acceptance. You might be interacting with a loved one, a spouse, who's still at anger or even denial. And so it's really important to have this grounding as we start to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and the financial side of relationships. Whether you're married or partnered, or you're repartnering, or maybe you're looking for a relationship, we think it's important to talk a little bit about, as it says here, the romance and the business of life, and how personal and financial interests, views, concerns can intersect. So a couple of things to think about. One is that money does not need to control or define a relationship. And as I say that, I realize that for many of us, inadvertently or actually consciously, money is a big part of relationships. And it could be your familiar relationships, it could be with your spouse or significant other, it could be with siblings. I also want to say that how money impacts your relationship is really up to you. And I think we all know this. How you react is really your choice. Amidst all of the uncertainty and the chaos, it's up to you to decide how you're going to react. And then in turn, how you interact with those that you care about. So one of the things that we know is that with current research, married people tend to have more money than single people. That may seem obvious. We also know that consumer debt strains marriages and often can be the cause of parting, of divorce. Assets can strengthen a marriage. We also know that husbands and wives tend to see their personal financial world differently. We know this also from investing. Often we'll find that the female in the couple may tend to be the more conservative one, maybe focus more on the cash flow and budgeting issues, and the husband may be more focused on investments, on the bigger picture. That's not always true. Often there will also be a reversing of roles or mixing of roles. And yet we do see it differently. And certainly when it comes to investing, we often see it differently. So that's all important, I think, in the context of thinking about how money infuses relationships. And one of the things we know as well is that divorce can make people's financial situations quite difficult. Often it's the woman who suffers more, but that's not always the case. It really depends on the situation. So one of the things that we want to think about and talk about is, what causes the most tension, and to really ask you what causes the most tension in your relationship, and I'll say in your relationships. So even if you don't have a spouse or partner, it may be with some of your close family members. So we're actually going to do a poll on this one. There's 6 choices here. What's causing the most tension in your relationship? So we're going to go ahead and put that up, and we're going to ask everybody to go ahead and weigh in on this, and we will see what happens, and ask you all to go ahead and submit. And then Davis said, if you want to go ahead and share, we can do that. Okay. So, and remote control did get some votes, so not surprising on that. It's interesting. What we also know is that money, more than sex, is often the source of tension in relationship. And that may seem crazy. People are more willing to talk about sex than money. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. We are also, to be very honest, we are finding that during this time of lockdown, issues around substance abuse and alcohol may also be a bigger issue than they have been before. So lots of different things that can cause tension. Not surprisingly, money is right up at the top. So what can make money and marriage work better? And really, again, money in any sort of relationship work better. Well, first thing is open and respectful communication, being able to talk about how you approach money, what is important to you around money, how you would like to move forward in deploying money. All of these are very important conversations to have. It all starts with open and respectful communication. From there, having shared beliefs and values. And often when we partner with somebody, it is because we have shared beliefs and values. So that is a really important part of making a relationship work. And yet sometimes there are some differences. And then finally, what we like to talk about as certified financial transitionists is this idea of having agreements and having good habits or systems or policies around how we interact with money as a family, as individuals, as couples. And it could be as simple as the idea of, if I'm going to spend more than $500, put more than $500 on a credit card, I'm going to let you know. Checking in with each other on a regular basis to talk about what the expenses are for the month, and if there are any shortfalls, how are we going to cover those? So having regular open communication and having agreements and good habits, whether it's tracking expenses through a tool like mint.com, which we really love at Omega, or maybe even Quicken, or even a spreadsheet, and being able to share that and make sure that you're on the same page. That's really important. And I realize not always easy to make happen. It's also good to have regular family meetings, maybe once a month, to check in with each other about the important financial decisions that are coming up, or perhaps just to check in on where are we. From there, we know that it is tough to talk about money. And often here's what we hear when we're talking with clients. It can be really negative. People get upset. And we're so busy, we don't have time to talk to each other. Why do we want to focus on the topic where we know we're going to get into a fight? Or for some of our clients, they like to be in control, and the idea of being told what I can and cannot do, not really interested in that. Or I was just talking about values and beliefs. Maybe we don't agree on money, and we definitely hear that one on a regular basis. We hear that some people like to spend money, have different priorities about it, and with other people, they're very frugal with how they spend money. So it really does vary, and sometimes it can be a source of tension. And maybe one or the other person in the couple just doesn't listen to the other one. And as I said, open, honest communication is really important. And it brings out the worst in us. So we get into fights. So again, back to the first common answer is, it's better just to not talk about it. Often we find that all of this discomfort with talking about money started way before the current relationship started. So in some families, money was never talked about. Money was taboo. You didn't talk about what we had or what we made, or it just wasn't a topic of conversation in the family. So it becomes something, like I said, as a taboo. We just don't talk about those issues. And then even once you're in your own relationship, in your own family, it's still something that doesn't get talked about. Or you watched your parents fight over money issues. And so all it does is sort of bring up PTSD for you, and you just don't want to talk about it. You don't want to take the chance of getting into fights like your parents did. And I love this one. Well, we don't talk about it because we don't have any money to talk about. And the reality is that, unless you literally have no income coming in and no expenses going out, we all have something to talk about around money. Yes, it may be tight. Maybe the income and expenses aren't lining up. Yet we still need to be talking about, what are our priorities? How can we change our situation? What can we make different? And then another one that we run into, because we actually have a little bit more women clients than men. And we sometimes have situations where the wife in the couple is making more money than the husband. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen sometimes. Or it could be husband to wife. Either way, one person in the partnership is making a large amount more than the other person in the couple. And so that can lead to some disparity and on how we should use money. Can I ask about things? Can I ask for money? It feels awkward. And then there's just that keeping it separate. So this is my money, that's your money. We often see that with new couples, newly married couples, when they come in, that they've got their own accounts. And I'll also say that we see couples who've been married for 30 years who still have their own accounts, only with their name on them. And so that's something that we like to gently unpack, to understand, to make sure everybody understands what the pros and cons of that, because sometimes that can be a real challenge if there's an emergency, or heaven forbid somebody was to die, and then the other spouse can't access those resources and accounts. And then the last one is, well, we don't talk about it because we don't have any money issues. Well, if that's you, congratulations. That's fantastic that that's where you are. And yet, I think it's important to talk about money. Make sure that we're on the same page. Make sure that if one of you is responsible for doing all the bill paying and has all the online bill paying passwords and user IDs, that you're sharing that information. It's actually really powerful, and I think it strengthens a marriage, that even when there's no money issues, to be able to make shared decisions and to be intentional about your approach as a family, as a couple, about money. So one of the other big issues that we hear and people will say to us is, well, we don't know how to talk about it. In fact, sometimes couples will come in and say, well, this is the only time that we talk about these issues. This is the only time when we talk about money, we talk about our investments, we talk about our cash flow or budgeting. It's when we come in to talk with you. Well, now we don't mind that. We don't mind being the facilitator, so to speak. And we often want to encourage you to be having those conversations at home. Hopefully, through the life planning work we do, we can find ways to come together to make sure that we have a shared purpose around life and financial decisions, that we've got a financial plan that we're working towards. All of that, I think, can help. And yet we understand that sometimes it's hard to know how to have these conversations. So I think one of the things that is really important that we believe in reinforcing and helping to support is building a communication bridge. So what we know is that each person, all of us, have a preferred communication style. And as we talk with prospective new clients, and certainly with all of our existing clients, we have asked to understand through a communication preference tool that we use what their preferred communication style is. And we ask things like, well, how do you like information to be delivered to you? And what kinds of, do you prefer meetings or phone calls? And how do you make decisions? And what are some of the things that we should understand about you? Maybe you have a high need for control, or maybe you want us to soften the tone, or maybe give you options and give you time to process and think about a decision or some information that we've given you. So understanding each and every one of our clients' communication styles is critical. In fact, we review it every time when we're preparing to meet with our clients, to meet with you. We want to make sure we understand how your communication style might be different from us. And we also, for many of the clients who've joined us in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, we also do another assessment called Kolbe, Kolbe, and it's how you instinctually take action. We find that along with the communication preference really helps us understand, customize, and personalize how we work with each of our clients. We also love taking the Kolbe profiles of two people in a couple, and there's a shared report that we can give to you that can help. And whether it's, and we'll say it's not just couples, we've had parents and adult children, we've had on occasion business partners. So there's lots of different uses for that Kolbe comparison, but it helps people understand how might somebody communicate differently, operate differently, take action differently than you. We also know that most of the time we are using our socialized style, sort of the adaptive style, because we're trying to accommodate others. So we might acquiesce a little bit. We might try to approach things in a similar way to perhaps a spouse or partner or another loved one. But we also know that when we're pressured, when we're stressed, we're confused, we're going through a time like COVID-19 and some of the financial issues and some of the other social issues that have come up, we tend to go back to our hardwired style. That's why we ask for everyone's preferred communication styles. We know you can adapt, and we want to know how you naturally prefer to be communicated with, and how we know that you will communicate. And one of the things that we ask that's always really fascinating is if you're feeling disconnected in working with us, or maybe a conversation that we're having, what are we going to see you do? Is there a certain thing you're going to do, or something you're going to say? And we have had all kinds of answers, everything from, well, I won't say anything, but maybe my husband will tell you later, to, well, I'll start asking lots of questions, I'll shut down, I'll get my phone out, to, luckily, and this has been many of the answers, I'll just tell you if I'm having a difficulty or an issue with how we're communicating. And we ask, can we check in with you as well? We think communication is so important in all relationships, and certainly in marriages, it's important as well. So when we're doing communication style, these are exactly the kinds of preferences that we're going to ask you to look at. And many of you may have already completed this for us. They're all over the place. And sometimes what's interesting is people will give us varying answers. So I love when we get, move quickly to the bottom line, but allow me time to process my response. So that can seem like two different things. Or, um, I think it's really important for us to encourage my input, but then sometimes people are too busy. Do not mistake my lack of response for inattention. So we try to accommodate these different communication styles. We ask people to pick maybe 4 to 5 that most fit with who they are and how they like to operate. And it's been really useful as far as working with our clients, and also just understanding each other within the Omega team. So one of the things that we see sometimes, to really see this in a practical way, is that we might see with a couple, and this is a he and a she, but you could replace the pronouns however you want. Give me the details, allow me time to process, and then remember, I need time to analyze. So this is somebody who's going to be more detail oriented, and is going to need to think about things a little bit. And so we need to keep that in mind. And we ideally provide some time for processing, maybe providing information in advance. Now, opposite in the couple is give me facts and let's make a decision. So she may want bullet point facts, a quick overview, maybe that executive overview, and then there's an assumption that, well, it's time to go, let's go. And so the challenge is that if we don't know these differences in communication preferences, we can have a lot of conflict. That's back to all the reasons why we don't want to talk about money. But when we do know these preferences, then we can have an agreement around, okay, I know that he's going to need some time to digest all the information, maybe ask some questions, and then process it. And I may need to just wait for him, or we might agree that on certain kinds of decisions, the wife will get to make them and move quickly, but on different types of decisions, we have an agreement that we're going to take our time. Maybe if we're going to spend over X amount, or it's really a life-changing decision, then we're going to move at his pace. But otherwise, if we can, we're going to move at her pace. So just being able to understand those differences, communicate and respect those differences, and then having some agreement around it. As another example, so just the opposite. So she, or one of the two people in the couple, might say, well, I need you to slow down and soften the tone. Don't raise your voice, don't get overly excited. In fact, we had someone say to us just yesterday, a prospective client, well, if you get too energized and you get too excited, I'm going to back off on you. I'm really going to retreat. So that was really important for us to know. And in addition, might also need to see some options. And we ask, do you need 2 options, 3 options? How many options do you need? So then on the other side of the couple, get to the point quickly, and please let me know that you're listening. Be an active listener so that I know that you understand. So before that we're meeting, he might want to consider the options a little bit. And we want to make sure that we have the time to get a list of questions together, concerns, opinions, make sure that everyone's concerns and needs and questions have been addressed. And then when they meet, He might slow things down a little bit to accommodate her, certainly not raise his voice, even if it is a topic that has a little energy to it. And then she's going to try to get to the bottom line because that's what he needs. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that you can navigate through if you work with us and you've done communication preference. If you want us to put that back out in front of you, we're happy to do that, especially if you're having a bit of a disagreement or you're having a conflict around an important decision. That might be a great time to revisit, what do you each need? And I think it's important to understand that it's not a thing you're doing to the other person. It's just a difference in how you're built. And once you start to understand that, and we can take the emotion out of it, that why are you doing this to me? Why are you slowing things down? Well, it's because that's how I am. It's not that I have a problem with you. It's just I'm trying to process this. This is a big decision for me, and I want to make sure I do a good job. So I think when we can separate out the differences in who we are, we can take some of the emotion out. That's when we can have those rich, full, open, honest communications. So how do we reduce stress? And, you know, I have to say, working in a relationship, I've been married almost 32 years now, it takes hard work. And then that's just talking about sort of the day-to-day issues of life. And then you drop money into the equation. And then we drop COVID-19 and all of the things that have come up with that. How do we reduce the stress? Well, I think, again, good communication can really go a long way. Respect for differences in values and respect for differences in how we approach decision-making, how we process information. All of that is important. And then finally, having those agreements around what's important, who gets to make a decision, how we make a decision, how we prioritize money and money decisions are all important in bringing down that stress level. And I think you can apply all of these ideas really to some of the stress that you may have been experiencing during COVID-19. We all take this on differently. If you go back to the stages of grief, you may be at different stages in the grief process. And I think when you can realize that and maybe acknowledge that, oh, you're there, I'm here. That's why we're not seeing eye to eye on, do we need to wear masks? Should we go out to a restaurant? When we understand those differences in where we are in that process, it can go a long way in alleviating some of the stress that we might be feeling right now, whether it's money related or not. All of this can have a positive, can make an impact of money in relationships less stressful, and really the impact of the experience that we've been going through during this time. It hasn't been easy. It is getting easier. If you're having a hard time and you need some help, maybe walking through an important decision, whether it's a career decision or a financial decision, maybe even a life decision, reach out to us. We're happy to try to talk through this. We can pull out both the stages of grief as well as your communication preferences, maybe your Colby profiles, and just see if we can sort through what are the real issues here, where can we find common ground, shared purpose, and move forward together. So I'm wondering, Davis, do we have any comments or do we have any questions at this point?
We do not.
Okay, great. So I want to just wrap up and say that we really appreciate you joining us for part 2, talking about stress and the impact of money on relationships. And I hope you'll join us next week, same day of the week, same time, to talk a little bit about returning and moving to the new normal. I know that that's already happening for a lot of you. We'll share a little bit about what we're thinking about as far as how we might interact with our clients. We'll be talking about those questions that we've been asking a lot of our clients, just to help you start to think about not only how do you move forward, but also what has changed and how can you benefit from this unprecedented, amazing experience that we've all been going through over the last 4 or 5 months. So thank you for being with us. Again, I'll just check in, make sure we don't have any questions or comments. Davis, anything out there?
No.
Okay, great. Davis, thanks for your help today, and thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you for part 3 of this series.